Several commentators are warning that the 2024 general elections in this country are under threat. Parliament is scrambling to amend the Electoral Act by December this year. The Constitutional Court, you might remember, had declared the Act unconstitutional as it doesn't allow independent candidates to contest the polls. But now the Electoral Amendment Bill is facing heavy criticism, with former Cabinet Minister Valli Moosa, who's actually one of the architects of the Constitution, saying the proposed bill falls short of the country's values. As you can see, Valli joins us now via our video link for more on his thoughts. And Mr. Moosa, great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Let me begin firstly by just gauging from you to what extent, at least on the basis of principle, you agree with the Constitutional Court that the Electoral Act must be amended.
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your listeners. Generally my approach is that the Constitutional Court exists so as to tell us exactly what the Constitution means. And the Constitutional Court is not made up of one person, it's made up of a number of judges. They normally very, very thorough as far as their work is concerned. So I'm in agreement with the judgment which says that essentially in our democracy, Parliament is run by political parties, like in democracies all over the world. But you should not make it impossible for a person who wants to stand for elections that does not belong to any political party to be able to do so. In other words, independent candidates. That's what the court says. Yeah. And that's what our Constitution says. And in fact, since then, I've looked at a number of other things. For example, if you consider the Freedom Charter, the Freedom Charter adopted in 1955 in its very first aspiration, where it says that people shall govern, it emphasizes specifically that every South African should have the right to stand for elections of all bodies that make laws in this country. Makes that very clear. I also went back to look at what President Mandela said to Parliament in his very last speech to Parliament in 1999, because, he only served one term.
Right.
The first term of Parliament came to an end, and he advised the members of Parliament to change the electoral system so as to create a direct link between members of Parliament and voters. So the Constitutional Court judgment is fine. Where the problem lies is what the DA and the ANC has done in interpreting that judgment. They have decided to deal with this as a purely administrative matter. Actually, what they don't want is they don't want independence. Both the DA and the ANC seems to have a fear for independence. I think an unfounded fear, really. And as a result of which they have devised a completely new electoral system. One that, frankly, even the leaders of the DA and the ANC that I've spoken to don't understand. It is a complex, convoluted electoral system, which is going to result essentially in the voters that vote for independent candidates being cheated, because you will no longer have a situation where every vote counts.
Sure.
The principle of proportional representation is being thrown out of the window. And so this is something that we are extremely worried about.
Yeah, loud and clear. I mean, to be fair, there have already been, people who've worked even in the IEC. I'm thinking of the likes of Thierry Telane, who've been upfront about how this is uncharted territory and it's going to be incredibly difficult to get right, mostly because we've actually never even attempted it before. From your vantage point, are the solutions clear enough for us to still be able to have these elections by 2024?
Oh, yes. I have no doubt that the 2024 elections will happen and that it can happen under a reformed electoral system. We've got more than enough time as far as that is concerned. Many of us have looked at the detail of this very carefully. So that's not the issue. But what we don't have time to do is to implement the kind of electoral system which has now been devised, because this is untested. As you say, Terry has said, it's untested. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's extremely complex. It's convoluted. And when the results are finally announced, the voters are not going to understand how the results were arrived at. And so you run a big risk of the outcome of the elections actually being challenged at the next thing. And what many of us have been proposing is go for something that we know. Go for something that is simple, straightforward, that voters would understand. But it appears to me as though because the DA has been losing a lot of their members to other parties and to independents, and even the ANC in the local government elections, in order to save themselves, they are really shooting themselves in the foot. But Ayanda, what's most concerning is that the leaders of the ANC and the leaders of the DA are generally completely unaware of this new electoral system that's been considered in Parliament. Because I've spoken to many of them.
Yeah.
They say they don't really know about it. So it means that the country is on autopilot and we're in a very dangerous situation.
Right. Which again brings into sharp focus questions about whether or not we'll be ready come 2024. I mean, my understanding, for instance, is that these amendments need to have been adopted by December. That's less than 2 months from where we are. And even then, the IEC is really concerned about whether or not they'll have enough time to plan the logistics, even around things as basic as the ballot paper, in time for us to head to the polls by 2024.
So Ayanda, what's going to happen is that actually Parliament was given a deadline of 2 years. The 2 years expired on the 11th of June this year. Constitutional Court then gave Parliament an extra 6 months. So Parliament is right now in injury time, and it has to complete its work by December. At the rate it's going, even if it does complete its work, it will be adopting a bill that is unconstitutional. So it will be thrown out by the Constitutional Court because it's going to be challenged by many people in this country will challenge the thing. What will then happen is that the Constitutional Court itself is likely to make a determination, and it will determine the manner in which independent candidates should be accommodated. That's not the best solution, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Constitutional Court. If Parliament fails to do it, the court will have to do it themselves.
Do you not envision a situation where there's, questions around the separation of powers? I mean, as you rightly mentioned, this is something that the legislature should be busy with, and not necessarily work that jurists should be involved in.
You're absolutely correct. This is purely in the domain of Parliament and the legislature. But in a situation where the legislature has gone delinquent and just refuses to apply its mind and refuses to do this thing in a proper manner as such, and deliberately adopts a bill which is unconstitutional, they'll be doing it deliberately because many of us have warned Parliament over and over. In that situation, the country cannot be paralyzed. The court is where the buck stops, and the court itself will have to make a determination. And we are calling on Parliament, many of us right now, to say, don't put the country in that situation. Do the right thing now. Apply your mind. And my advice to members of Parliament is just read the bill. Read the bill that you're about to vote on, because many of them haven't even read it, haven't read the implications of it. And not one political party in this country has published an analysis or a justification of the electoral system they are about to adopt. They haven't done that. So this is our advice to them. There's time to do it, and there is time to do it properly. The 2 months that are remaining is sufficient time actually to do the right thing, because almost all of the groundwork has been done and is in place.
Sure. There's another option, of course, and that's the president potentially refusing to sign the bill into law if, in fact, it doesn't get sent back to Parliament with the amendments that you speak of. I mean, how much pressure do you reckon lies on his shoulders, keeping in mind, by the way, his own interests come 2024, as someone who's affiliated with the ANC that may very well vote him into power at the end of the year?
Well, when Parliament passes a bill and sends it to the President to sign, the President, I'm 100% certain the President doesn't act on his own. He pulls together his legal team and he says, look at this bill, should I sign it? Does it meet all of the constitutional requirements? And I have no doubt that his legal advisors will say to him, don't sign it, send it to the Constitutional Court and ask them whether it meets constitutional muster. So it's almost certain that the President will send it to the Constitutional Court for an opinion before he signs it. I will be very surprised if he signs it without doing that.
Sure. Interesting insights indeed. Valli Moosa, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. What a time to be alive. The next 2 months are going to be incredibly interesting, not only because of what's taking place in the governing party, but certainly around this issue of the Electoral Act. Valli Moosa, once again, is a former cabinet minister, also known as one of the architects of the country's constitution.